They called it the disease of kings, a curse whispered in marble halls and gilded chambers. For centuries, it struck those who dined at tables heavy with meat and goblets, overflowing with wine. It was not a plague of the poor, nor an illness of famine, no, this was a pain reserved for power. Imagine a royal feast in the heart of medieval Europe. Flames flicker against the walls as servants carry silver trays piled high with roasted game, sweet pastries, and fine cheeses. Laughter echoes beneath vaulted ceilings as nobles drink deep from jeweled cups. But behind the splendor, in chambers, where silk curtains veil the night, a king lies awake, his foot swollen, his joints burning like fire. He cannot walk to his throne. He cannot ride to war. His kingdom waits, while he writhes in agony from a disease he cannot conquer. This is the story of Gout, story that winds through the courts of emperors, the studies of philosophers, and the dining halls of the elite. It is the tale of a sickness that shaped history, crowned with luxury yet chained by pain. And like all stories of power, it begins not with the throne, but with a question. Why did wealth become a wound? Gout was never just an illness. In the world of monarchs and nobles, it was almost a badge of status, fiery mark of privilege worn upon the body. To suffer from gout was, in an odd way, to confirm one's place among the elite. For who else could afford the feasts that brought such pain? The disease made its presence known in the most merciless way. It attacked the joints, especially the big toe, with sudden flares of agony so intense that even the weight of a bedsheet could feel unbearable. The pain was not fleeting. It lingered for days, sometimes weeks, leaving its victims swollen, feverish, and helpless. But in the courts of power, this torment carried a strange sort of honor. For centuries, physicians and philosophers believed gout to be a disease born from excessa, consequence of the richest foods, the sweetest wines, the pleasures reserved only for the privileged. The poor, who toiled under hunger, would never know such suffering. Only those who lived in abundance, who dined on meats and sauces heavy with fat, who drank the finest wines from golden goblets, could fall prey to this royal curse. In this way, gout became more than a sickness. It was a symbol, a whispered testament that a man had lived richly, eaten well, and drunk deeply. To have gout was to possess the one thing no commoner could claim, the luxury of excess. And so, as kings and lords limped through their palaces, they carried not just the weight of their crowns, but the price of their indulgence. The roots of gout stretch deep into the soil of ancient history. This disease, so closely tied to kings and nobles, is as old as civilization itself. The earliest descriptions date back more than 2,000 years. In the papyrus scrolls of ancient Egypt, physicians noted symptoms of swollen joints and fiery pain in the feet, signs that would later define gout. But it was in Greece that the disease gained its name and its first great interpreters, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, wrote about gout in the 5th century BCE. He observed its peculiar nature. It struck men in the prime of life, sparing eunuchs and women before menopause. He even warned that the indulgence of food and wine was its chief companion. His words echo across the centuries, a stern reminder that pleasure often carries a price. From Greece, the knowledge flowed to Rome, where gout became the affliction of emperors. Roman writers spoke of it as podagra, the foot trap, a name that captured its cruel grip. Pliny the Elder, chronicler of the natural world, lamented that the luxuries of his age had bred this torment. As Roman feasts grew grander, so too did the ranks of those crippled by pain. By the 1st century CE, gout had become more than a medical curiosity. It was a mirror of society's excess, reflecting the wealth and decadence of those who ruled. From the Nile to the Tiber, it whispered the same truth. Abundance can wound, and power often carries its own poison. As the Middle Ages dawned, gout walked hand in hand with power. In the courts of Europe, where banquets glittered and goblets overflowed, the disease became almost a companion to the crown. Chroniclers noted its victims, and in their records, a pattern emerged. Those who ruled often limped. Among the most famous was King Henry VIII of England. His image, broad, regal, and defiant, still dominates history books. But behind the portraits, painted with jewels and ermine, there was agony. By the later years of his reign, Henry could barely move. His once proud stride was replaced by a painful shuffle, his swollen legs bound in bandages. Historians whisper of gout, fed by the endless feasts and rivers of wine that marked his rule. He was not alone. Charles V of Spain, master of a global empire, suffered so greatly that he retired early to a monastery, his body racked with pain. Across the Channel, in France, Louis XIV, the Sun King, the very embodiment of opulence, endured the same torment, even as his court at Versailles dazzled the world. In these glittering halls, power and pain shared the same throne. Gout became the silent enemy of rulers, a disease that mocked their wealth and chained their ambition. Thrones might be gilded, crowns heavy with gems, but in the dead of night, when the royal foot throbbed like fire, all the power of a kingdom could not buy relief. This was the cruel paradox of the disease of kings. The richer the life, the harsher the punishment. By the height of the Middle Ages, gout had become more than a personal affliction, was a subject of fascination, philosophy, and even pride. In an age ruled by the theory of humors, physicians saw gout not as a random curse, but as the natural price of privilege. The body, they believed, was governed by IV fluids, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. When these humors fell out of balance, sickness followed. Gout, they declared, came from an excess of richness, an overflow of life itself. To suffer from gout was therefore almost a sign of refinement. The poor, with their coarse diets and lean existence, were rarely troubled by the disease. But the learned, the noble, the wealthy, those who feasted on game, spices, and sweet wines, were its chosen victims. So strong was this belief that some even argued gout was a mark of intellect, sparing its sufferers from worse plagues. Better, they said, to limp in wisdom than to die in ignorance. As the Renaissance dawned, this strange admiration only grew. In the glittering courts of Italy and France, where art and excess walked side by side, gout became almost fashionable. Portraits from this era sometimes showed nobles reclining with swollen feet, their expressions proud rather than ashamed. To have gout was to declare, "I have lived well. I have tasted the finest pleasures of this world." But beneath the silks and marble halls, the truth remained cruel. Gout was agony. It burned like fire in the joints, chained its victims to their chambers, and turned kings into prisoners of their own flesh. No amount of poetry, philosophy, or pride could soften the bite of pain. The disease of kings remained a tyrant of its owner ruler that no crown could command. The age of enlightenment swept away the shadows of superstition, and with it came a new understanding of disease. Gout, long cloaked in mystery and pride, was no exception. Physicians of the 17th and 18th centuries began to study the illness. With sharper eyes, guided by reason rather than rumor. In 1679, the Dutch physician Antonie van Leeuwenhoek peered through his newly crafted microscope, and saw crystallstiny, needle-like shards lodged within the joints of gout sufferers. These crystals, he discovered, were made of uric acid, a substance that built up when the body could not properly eliminate waste. For the first time, gout was no longer a poetic punishment for indulgence, it was a chemical reality. Yet this revelation did little to ease its grip on the rich. If anything, the 18th century made gout even more common among the elite. The aristocracy dined on sugar, meat, and wine in quantities the poor could scarcely imagine. In Britain, gout became so widespread among politicians and scholars that it was jokingly called the English disease. Even great minds were not spared. Sir Isaac Newton suffered its torment, as did the philosopher Voltaire, who mocked his own pain with bitter wit. But science also offered hope. Physicians experimented with treatments, bloodletting, herbal concoctions, mineral waters, but true relief was rare. The paradox endured. Knowledge grew, yet suffering remained. Gout had shed its mystique, but not its chains. By the dawn of the modern age, gout had lost its royal exclusivity. No longer confined to palaces and marble halls, it began to creep into the lives of merchants, bankers, and eventually the middle class. Industrial wealth brought new diets, rich in meat, sugar, and alcohol, and with them came the same old torment. The disease of kings had become the disease of prosperity. Science, however, marched forward. In the 19th and 20th centuries, researchers unraveled the metabolic roots of gout. They discovered that it was caused by excess uric acid, which crystallized in the joints when blood levels grew too high. This could happen not only from feasting on meats and wine, but also from genetic factors, kidney function, and even certain medications. The myth of gout as a badge of privilege crumbled. It was no longer a poetic punishment for indulgence, but a complex disorder that could strike anyone today. Gout is common worldwide, affecting millions across all walks of life. It is still painful, still cruel, but no longer mysterious. Treatments. Exist medications that lower uric acid, lifestyle changes, and diets designed to prevent the fiery flares. What was once seen as a mark of power is now recognized as a medical condition, treatable and preventable. Yet the old image lingers. In art, in literature, and in language itself, gout remains tied to wealth, indulgence, and the glittering banquets of history. It is a reminder that power and excess have always carried a price, and that sometimes the body remembers what the mind prefers to forget.